somebody have a program for me? The little booklet? Thanks. I want to introduce our first speaker, Dr. William Provine. I first heard about Dr. Provine in 1995 when Madeleine Murray O'Hair and John Murray did a taping of their cable TV show, which was then called the American Atheist Forum. And they profiled this gentleman because of an article they read in MD magazine that he wrote, and that's in your folder too, called The Faith of an Atheist. People just love to put theological terms on atheists, don't they? But it was a very profound article, and he talked about the debate between evolutionists and creationists and the concept of free will, and I was captivated by it. So I was just delighted when he agreed to come here and talk about, I think it's going to be free will, if that's still what he wants to talk about, because I think he's recently been talking about that. But I just love the subject of free will. Dr. Provine is one of Cornell University's most famous biologists. He is famous not only for his contributions to hardcore science in the area of evolutionary biology and the history of science, but for his blunt and forthright assertion of the atheistic essence of that science. He is a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and has held a Guggenheim Fellowship. In 1988, he won Cornell's Clark Distinguished Teaching Award. In the war between science and theology, Professor Provine has not been known to take prisoners. Welcome, Dr. Provine.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you very much. I had planned to show some slides, but the way things are lighted up, I just don't think I'll use them at all. Besides, I've thought about these subjects a long time. Let me warn you in the first place that I may have a seizure in front of you. It's not bad. I just cease to talk. I drool, my teeth chatter, and my right arm shakes. In about 10 days, I'll have brain surgery to take that pesky tumor out. We don't know how quickly it will grow back, but at least it will be gone for a period of time. So anyway, if I have a seizure, don't worry about it in the least. I don't worry about it, so neither should you. I'm going to talk about the implications of Darwinism. None of them sound unfamiliar to you, except the last one, the concept of free will. But I'll go through these quickly, and I want to try and bring you up to date, at least briefly, upon new aspects of evolutionary biology since the time of the so-called Darwinian synthesis of the 1930s and 40s. At the time of the Darwin Centennial of 1959, it seemed that evolutionary biology was all together. That is, it wouldn't need to be changed except in details. And there are many prominent evolutionists alive now who still believe this. Many of them are in their 90s. But younger people have a different view. And indeed, I was in graduate school in evolutionary biology between 1964 and 1968. Nearly everything I learned about evolutionary biology has either been blown out of the water entirely or is very sharply retained now. So what I'd like to do is first talk about evolutionary biology and its implications, and then focus upon the issue of free will. Free will, as you know, is an issue that the existentialists were very concerned with. But the poor existentialists couldn't take the last step. They knew there were no gods. No God could be operating in the trenches of World War I. It's one of the most disgusting wars we've had. All of them are disgusting. But that one in particular was particularly disgusting. And they said there can't be a God that would allow things like this to go on. Well, how can we make any meaning of our lives? It's through exerting our own free will. And I will argue that we don't have that either, and they can't get meaning out of their lives by insisting on the existence of human free will. We cannot define ourselves, obtain meaning in life from a non-existent concept. Now to Darwinism. and modern Darwinism. Darwin himself believed all of the implications that I do, that many others do, about biology. He believed there was no argument from design left. The argument from design died with the idea of natural selection and the rest of the associated aspects of evolutionary biology. Since Darwin knew perfectly well that the only powerful argument for the existence of God was some version of the argument from design. If the argument from design falls, you are left with sterile academic arguments that indeed are unimpressive to the great majority of people who do believe in God. And Darwin was right. Design goes down, then all hope of a God worth anything goes down. Is there a way to save the notion of God? Of course there is. You can argue that God started off the whole universe, or God works through the laws of the universe. These are favorite tactics of those who want to be fully modern scientists and yet be believers at the same time. Well, it's just kind of hard to do that, because any God that would work through the laws of nature or who would set the whole thing off produces a universe exactly the same one that we see as atheists. One cannot pray to that God, nor can it answer prayers. It's just a God that does nothing. And so if you believe that sort of view, in my opinion, I've already won the argument with you. You're just like I am, with a little verbiage besides. Secondly, when you die, you are really dead. You are dead, dead, dead. I gave a lecture in front of a religious group one time, and see if you can guess which one it was. And I mentioned something about, I'm sad to tell you, of course, that when you die, you're completely dead. And these people came up afterwards and said, no, we say you're dead, dead, dead. What church is this? Unitarians. Of course it's Unitarians. Of course it's Unitarians. Thirdly, there is no hope of there being an ultimate basis for ethics. We will never have, nor have we ever had before, any kind of ultimate foundation for ethics. This is a terrible blow to religious people. They would like to find somewhere, somehow, this basis for ethics. But we don't have it. And if you look at life from an evolutionary perspective, one can see no possible way that any such ultimate foundation for ethics could have evolved. No, we're here on the earth ourselves with the other animals and plants, and we are going to have to figure out our own ethics. I'll come back to this issue in just a moment. Where are we going to find meaning in life? Ultimate meaning in life is what I strove for as a young kid, and it's what many people strive for now. Some kind of ultimate meaning in life. And the problem is that it doesn't exist. We exist in a world produced by a process that doesn't care about us one whit. It cares about us not at all. We live in a universe which is probably expanding. It will either continue to expand, and all life, all energy will become dissipated in time, and everything will grow cold. Alternatively, it will reach a stage in which it begins to come back together. I remember a wonderful cartoon of a scientist sitting out watching a telescope in the middle of the night, and a lady walks by and he shouts, "Closure! Closure!" You know the universe is beginning to come back together. When it does, it will start rather slowly and things will be okay for a while, but after some length of time, it'll all come back together into a particle less than 10 to the 10th centimeters on the side, and everything will be squashed in the process. If it comes back out again, there will be no recollection of human beings having ever lived. That's how much meaning the universe and our world and evolution give to our lives. The meaning that we find in our lives cannot be ultimate meaning. We've got to find other kinds of meaning in our lives. And finally, there is the issue of human free will. I will argue that it not only doesn't exist, but it is one of the meanest, most vicious cultural myths we have ever invented. A terrible, terrible, disastrous cultural myth. So now let me go over all of these, all of which you believe as atheists. This is just a way of looking at them, coming from the perspective of evolutionary biology. None of them is a serious detriment to human life. None of them. Giving up gods is great for our rational minds. It is great from the point of view of not having to satisfy some deity who's always wanting us to behave in ways that were determined thousands of years ago. It's a terrible business trying to follow that sort of stuff. And it frees us of that in order to change our morality, our ethics, to fit the situation that we have now. Now, I think that that's just great. So giving up the notion of a God, to me, is just wonderful. Living without it, terrific. I got no objection to that. What about dying? I used to not like the idea of dying, but now as I kind of look at it in the face, I don't mind it at all. We're all going to die. Everyone in here is going to die. Some of you will die before I do. And that's just the way life is. In mammals, we all die. And they're dead, dead, dead. That means that if you want to do anything in your life, you don't have to wait for your reward afterwards. You're here. You can do your good right now. Work for it. Work for the meaning in your lives. If life is lousy, work to try and make it better. If you can't make it better, then you know at least that you're living along a terrible life that should have been better had things been different. You can encourage people to work for it in generations that come after you. So, yes, you're going to die. Certainly you will. And you will not live any kind of life after that. But that, again, is part of simply being alive. An ultimate foundation for ethics is a disaster because, as we see, those who believe in it don't think it ever changes. Of course, they don't think it ever changes, but of course it does. Even within religious groups, it changes all the time. But they're quite resistant to these changes, and I think instead we can welcome changes with open arms. We cannot determine ethical issues from right now toward the future. We have all kinds of new stuff coming out, genetic cloning and other issues that we don't know how to handle. There's nothing in our background that enables us to do that. That's right. We're going to have to figure it out for ourselves. And what's happened most of the time in the past is not that we sit down and figure out the morality ahead of time and figure out how to behave. We pull it out of our asses. We just pull it out. We do the best we can when this situation comes up. And then later on, we turn around and say, oh, look at this foundation for ethics from which everything flows naturally. Foundations for ethics are secondary. They're not primary. They're secondary. When new problems come up, then we just have to face it, do the best we can. When we had kidney dialysis machines, and only a few of them, we had to decide who would live and who would die. It was a terrible problem, and we let the doctors decide it first. Then we decided, to heck with that, we're not going to let the doctors decide all this, so we'll have a committee of people at the hospital. The doctors thought, well, we'll have a committee of people around here. They'll all agree with what we say anyway. And so they got committees at the hospital. That didn't work. People didn't like that. So they started getting representatives from the community. And with that combination of representatives from the community, those in the hospital, we could make some real decisions about these things. But it took a long time. There was no fundamental aspect of ethics that taught us how to do this. We just did as best we could under the circumstances, and I'm sure that many people can think of this as coming from their particular foundation of ethics, but that's not where it came from. We faced the problem, and then we related it to foundations. So to me, foundations of ethics are basically useless, and we need to look for other kinds of things. Well, ultimate meaning in life is so ridiculous, I can't even believe it. What would you do? Trade all the things that give you meaning in your life now in a day-to-day manner? You would give those up in order to have ultimate meaning in life? I have never found a student, in all these students I teach at Cornell, who would opt for ultimate meaning in life rather than all the meaning they do have in their lives. The people that love them, the things they love to do, and all of that, they have to give all that up for ultimate meaning in life. Nobody wants to do that, and nobody would do that. And finally, we're back to the issue of free will. What does free will mean from an evolutionary perspective? What are we? Now, I happen to love bulldozers and tractors. I have some of each on the farm where I live. And these things are wonderful machines. In fact, when I get off of any of them, I give it a pat. It's a 1950 bulldozer, 1955 John Deere model. What model is that? I've forgotten. Well, anyway, it's a wonderful tractor. It's the biggest farm tractor they made that year. They are machines, and they almost have personalities because they only start a certain way and all of that kind of problem. We are machines. We are nothing but machines. My religious friends say, hey, that's nothing buttery. I've heard that over and over again, and yet still we're just machines. That's all we are, and we're nothing more than that. And we need to be programmed for ethics and other things. If we weren't programmed for it, we would be pretty interesting human beings if we had no programming for any kind of ethics. The closest we've seen to that are a few individuals over time, and they are really a kind of a mess in society. It's terrible for them. So what we have to do is to be programmed for ethics. Well, now, what do philosophers say about free will? You know any philosophers that do not believe in free will? Let me put it another way. Psychologists study human beings, their behavior as a scientist. Do you think they believe that human beings have free will? So, psychiatrists do, by the way. I gave a talk to a big group of psychiatrists, and about half of them believed in human free will and called their science not a science but an art. And the other group of psychiatrists who were there, who used mostly chemical means of changing people's personality to help them out, were all in favor of no free will. And then I just said a few things, and then they fought with each other for the rest of the night. That was no problem at all. I went to the psychology department at Cornell, gave a talk on free will, and it was very short, and I said, well, really, if you think you're doing science, then there's no such thing as free will, and end of talk, I'd like to hear your disagreements. There was no disagreement, although the chair of the department later told me he did believe in free will, but felt rather constrained under the circumstances. The philosophy department, to a person, believes in the existence of human free will. The philosophers say that the psychologists are living in the 19th century. The psychologists say the philosophers are living at the very latest at the time of Kant, and probably much earlier. The arguments for the existence of free will are so kind of weird that I can hardly believe it. My friends turn to me and say it's like freewheeling in a car. So that you take your foot off the gas and the car goes into freewheeling. And this, they said, is like free will, because it obeys all the laws of nature. There's no problem, but it's somehow free. Baloney, that thing's not free. They know it's not free. They admit that it's not free. Reminds me of this story of the fishmonger who was selling fish at the end of the day, and he says, well, here I am selling these fish, and I got to keep calling them. I got to shout, fresh fish, fresh fish. And this lady comes up and says, oh, I'd like to buy some fresh fish. And he opens the thing for her, and she says, oh, these fish aren't fresh. He says, lady, fresh fish is just their name. I never said they were fresh. And that's the basic idea. You take a look at human decision-making and you say, that's free will. We're going to call that free will. It's a trick, and it's not a very pleasant trick. The reason why it's not a very good trick, it's trying to salvage the notion of human free will. Now, why would they want to do it? Why are philosophers so keen on saving the idea of human free will? And incidentally, in an evolution class of 400 students, maybe 40% of whom become secularists by the end of the term, how much do they care about human free will? And almost to a person, they would much rather have free will than any kind of God. They'll give up God, but they'll retain the idea in human free will. There's a real strong cultural bias in favor of free will. If we make decisions, we want to think, I did it. Now, what's the consequence of this? Philosophers do it because they want us to retain a notion of moral responsibility. Free will and moral responsibility are all of a piece. Without free will, we could not have moral responsibility. So the argument goes. Immanuel Kant set down this dictum, but it was a lot older than he was. And Kant said, look, if you don't have free will, if you're not freely making the decisions to do the right thing, then you're merely being forced to do them, and you can't claim moral responsibility. And philosophers very deeply accept this argument. So they want for people to accept moral responsibility for their actions, and in order for that, they need free will. Now, how does this serve us in society? It serves us very well, because when somebody does something terrible, like this gentleman right in front of me, you've done something terrible. I don't want any share of this. You did it of your own free will. Hot diggity dog. All we've got to do is punish you. And our system of punishment is set up so it's going to be so bad, it's going to be so awful, that when you go into that system, probably you, being a nice person as you are, you're probably going to be destroyed by it. Other people would semi-flourish in those conditions and go on for a number of years, but guess what they learn from their fellow inmates? They learn how to be worse persons when they come out. Prison is a great source of making people into worse persons. Are they loved up? Are they cared for in prisons? Certainly not. We can't mollycoddle these people. I just saw a show last night on Russia. Maybe some of you saw that. They catch kids who are 14 years old, and they put them into a school for 3.5 years, where they're packed a dozen kids into the old gulag cells, treated unbelievably. I mean, it's just horrible. Reminds one of an American prison almost. And it's just a terrible situation that we have. It is the stupidest, most wasteful system of thinking about crime and punishment. Human beings do not have free will, and we can't imagine that they do have free will. So you do something bad, you're obviously a nice fellow, and we've got to think to ourselves, he must have been in a serious state of affairs. Now what we need to do is to put him in jail for a while and make sure that he's really okay. You killed your wife, and we got, We got to work out that problem. You work out that problem with a lot of love and help, and you come back out again, and you might actually make a really good husband the next time around. So I see no reason to keep somebody in jail any longer, no matter how heinous the crime, any longer than it takes to turn them around as productive human beings who could be in society. And the only way that we can do that is to care for our prisoners, to love them up, to believe in them, to say to them, yes, you can get out of here. You can become a decent member of society. And if the individual doesn't listen or can't comprehend this, well, they just have to stay in jail. There's no reason for them to get out. Now, somebody's going to suffer from this. It's the people who work in jails. Do you remember what happened to the people who worked in mental institutions? They were working along just fine until those damn drugs came out. And then it closed down the mental institutions. I mean, they closed down right and left. Even the hospitals are having trouble getting people into their units. They'll pay, in some places, for the police to bring in people and put them into their hospitals. So people who work in prisons are not just before letting this happen to them. It's an unconscious thing, but they basically try to treat people in such a way that they not only will not get better while they're in prison, but will become a recidivist and come right back to them. That's not a sad thing for those who work in prisons. That's a really good thing. You even like to see probably the same people come back. They're kind of friends of a sort. They're delighted to have them come back again. No problem to you. So free will is to my mind, the most awful kind of cultural myth. We need to get rid of it. And do you know how persuasive I am on this issue? Out of 400 students, there are, 3 or 4 who might find this argument persuasive because the cultural myth is so powerful. So how are we going to deal with this? And I have a way of dealing with it that may sound a little funny to you, being the total atheist that I am. I believe in working with religious people. Christians in this country share a belief in forgiveness, and they believe that we should treat people well, even those who do terrible things to us. Sometimes they need to be reminded of this. And I'm doing that. I'll go to the national meeting, the big one that the InterVarsity Christian Fellowship will hold in Chicago at the turn of the year. I've been to some of their meetings before. I attend meetings of the Campus Crusade for Christ and the InterVarsity Christian Fellowship at Cornell. It's a wonderful set of opportunities for us as atheists to see where we can join with the most religious people so that we can work together for the moral goals that all of us share. How close are the moral goals that you have in your life to those of fundamentalist Christians? I would argue that you could sit down with these folks, that you get in a meeting this size, so half of you is one, half of you is the other, and you could agree right down the line on the majority of ideas you wanted to be at the foundation of morality. I believe you could agree on those. So what we need to do is to work together. I like to butt heads against religious people. That's fun. I do a lot of that. I debate, while I attend the meetings of Campus Crusade for Christ, I debate their professional debaters in the lecture hall. And I enjoy doing that because I know I will lose. The lecture hall is packed with their people, and then they take a vote at the end. I always lose. But it's fun. I enjoy doing that. But that's not getting ahead in society. I'll give you one more example. since I teach evolutionary biology, and there's a great attempt to try and insert through one backhanded method or another the so-called teaching of creationism in our schools. The National Academy has just issued a new directive, a new guidebook on how to teach evolution in the schools. Half of Americans, by the way, are young Earth creationists. Half are young Earth creationists. The Gallup poll shows this time and time again. Besides that, there are many deeply religious people who reject evolution because they see that it cannot be consonant with their religious views. I'd guess of all Americans, maybe 85 to 90% disagree with evolutionary biology. Some of them believe in evolution, but like Catholics, for example, Pope John Paul says, yes, I believe in evolution. We share a common ancestor with the chimpanzees. And by the way, God gave us our immortal souls about 10,000 years ago. So, he's a believer in evolution, but he doesn't believe in evolution really. He just doesn't go quite far enough. So the view I have is that we open up the classroom to everybody. We don't shut up anyone. The National Academy says, let's shut up these people and give teachers some techniques for shutting them up. Over half of Americans, well over half, let's figure out how to shut them up and not let them participate in the science classroom. How stupid. Do you think evolution can't compete? Do you think evolution will suffer if we let everybody speak their minds in science class? They can get on the web. Everybody can get a lot of ammunition for each other's side. What we can have is a wonderful debate in class. It will make evolution into the best subject in high school biology. It already is, I think, in college biology, but only in the non-majors course, because in the majors course, all the people who believe in anything other than nitty-gritty evolution get shut up. And I don't think that's fair one bit. Everybody ought to have their say. How in the world are you going to change someone's mind unless you can treat what they say for critical discussion? You can never get anywhere. So by all means, open up the science classroom. Do the teachers have to teach creationism? Certainly not. The students will have all the views they want to introduce. And all the views that want to be introduced are part of this science classroom. The pedagogy of this approach has been shown time and time again to really work. It's fun. It's interesting. And evolution becomes the best part of the subject. Some of my best friends, by the way, are creationists. And they like me because I argue they should be able to participate in class. Finally, they are the only way we atheists will ever get anywhere. If you have goals that you want in society, you will never get there by yourself. You may be able to prevent a certain number of really overt religious symbols, but as atheists, you won't do much more than that. Why should you hide your atheism? I don't hide mine. I'm an atheist. I stand behind that. But I'm damn well going to work with other people to get done what we have to get done in this society, and I'm not going to let them push me aside and brand me as some kind of stupid atheist. I'm going to be right there in their face, and I'm going to say, look at what we share. You can't write me off, and I promise not to write you off either. Let's work for those goals together. Thank you.
I think we have time for some questions. I thought that was just terrific. I just love that subject. Great. Now, since we have C-SPAN cameras here, would you just repeat the question into the microphone before you answer it? Anybody have a
Sure.
question?
Yes.
Sometimes when I am arguing the question of free will, people hit me with a question. I think it comes ultimately from Roger Penrose. Some idea of quantum indeterminacy being multiplied in the brain somehow, and that this results in free will. How do you deal with that argument?
The question is, does quantum mechanical indeterminacy free us to have free will? No, of course not. The reason is very simple. Evolutionary biology, over 3.5 billion years, has minimized the effects of quantum mechanical indeterminacy. It has done this because otherwise the mutation rates would be too vastly large. In fact, it seems amazing that our genome, with as few molecules as it has, isn't just ripped apart by quantum mechanical indeterminacy. So it seems clear that the evolutionary process has damped out that kind of indeterminacy. You can think of humans as being locally deterministic. I'm not giving a universal kind of determinism, don't know anything about that, and don't really care. But humans are little deterministic systems. So we can treat them that way, and of course they don't have free will. There's another problem with quantum mechanical indeterminacy. That is a process that's either, this or that. And there's some wonderful experiments that are coming out only in the last 10 years about the this and the that, because it's very confusing. Now, how would you like to get your choices be this or that? You don't do anything. These things go like that, and all of a sudden you're stuck with chocolate ice cream that day. I mean, no. You can never get human free will, which is deeply deterministic, deeply the result of human choice on a day-to-day basis. You can't get it out of a stochastic, that is a probabilistic kind of process. No way. Yes?
We've all heard of the ruse that God is love. I've heard of the ruse that God is evolution. Teilhard de Chardin, a French philosopher, Catholic philosopher, and the Catholic priests have been pushing this a lot on freethinkers, that God is evolution. Maybe you could argue against that. Tell us how to combat that.
I'll be glad to argue against that. My father gave me Teilhard de Chardin's book, The Phenomenon of Man, when I was in college. And when I read it, I thought, this is really it. I can retain my religious views and really believe in evolution. But it wasn't until I studied evolutionary biology that I realized that Teilhard de Chardin was full of baloney when it comes to evolutionary biology. There's no sense from evolution of any sort of purpose or design. It is truly the designless process. Modern evolution, since 1968, there wasn't enough time to really talk about that, has shown how deeply evolutionary biology is completely purposeless. Your genome did not evolve mostly under natural selection. It evolved mostly under neutral molecular evolution, like about 95% of it. And that's purely probabilistic, has nothing to do with natural selection. That's one of the exciting aspects of modern evolutionary biology. So there just isn't the kind of purpose that Teilhard de Chardin would like to see in evolution. If you already believe that, well, then Teilhard de Chardin sounds pretty good. But evolutionists have rejected him from the beginning. It was only religious people and philosophers who took him up.
I want to ask you, you're bringing a point about psychological determinism. This has always been the argument against free will. I'm in agreement with you on this. And our foundation used to sell Charles H. Smith's Sensism Philosophy of the West. Strongly goes along with what you're saying on the matter. The one question I do have for you, you mentioned something about us having a lot in common with fundamental Christians.
Yes.
According to Smith, and I'm in agreement with him personally, we have a different ethical base, or not all atheists, but some atheists do, on the matter of the Christian's idea of altruism, so to speak, the willingness to sacrifice oneself for everybody else, and it gets to runaway proportions within their belief system. I want to question you about this on what you said, and get your response, please.
His question is about altruism, that fundamentalist Christians have a different view of where altruism comes from than atheists do. I agree that they have different bases in that sense. Of course I agree with you. Hey, we both agree that people ought to be altruistic. That's the whole point. What basis is there for ethics anyway? On what can you really rely? People's selfish interest. The problem is, can you raise people to have the selfish interest to be kind and altruistic to others? That's the key for raising kids. You raise your kids, you program them, so that when they do something nice for someone else, they get a jolt of pleasure out of it. It's just what we want. Okay, an atheist does that. Now, somebody else who's a fundamentalist Christian, their kids don't automatically become altruists either. They've got to teach it. So they teach altruism to the kids before the kids can even think about really where it came from. And at a later age, then they can learn that it came from God. So to me, I could care less what a person's fundamental assumptions are when we can work together on making a better society. And I would think that atheists need to work harder on this problem of inculcating selfishness, a selfishness that is based upon being kind of smart. You want to get ahead, kid? You want to get ahead? Then you be altruistic to others, because that will net you more in your life than any other way of behaving.
To me, selfishness means concern with one's own interest.
I've got no problem with that. That is selfishness. That is concern for your own interest. How do you get along best in this world? I don't know any way of getting along well in the world that is better than being altruistic toward others. You can have people love you and care for you, and you care for them. What a neat result of being selfish. Maybe I'll take one more.
I'm very pleased to hear you say that, because so many times Christian people paint us as the opposite of love. God is love, and if we're not God, we must be hate. And we need to get past that point, and maybe you've got some ideas on how to do that. We see this most active in the fight over the Ten Commandments. Two commandments, in summary, one says love God, the other says don't kill anybody. We're saying we want to get those things off the wall. The Christians are afraid what we really want to do is go kill people, when all we really mean is don't love God. We've got to somehow say we like people and we don't like God. So the Christians have... How do we get past that problem? You've already thought about this, I can tell.
The question is very well put. How can atheists avoid being pushed off into the position of not really believing in love? I had a wonderful session with Cornell's United Religious Work. They invite me over there occasionally to titillate them. And I'm really happy to do that. In fact, I'd really try and get inside of their noggins, and I'm encouraging them to offer a course on religion for the student body. But they're not even really members of the faculty, so they're having a hard time getting around to doing that. But that day, I argued that we don't have free will, and Chuck says no God and all that. And the Lutheran minister who was sitting next to me said, "You can't love anyone."
He said that hatefully.
Oh, he did. There was nothing pleasant about it at all. So I took him on, and I said, "Do you mean that I cannot share love with another person? Would you like to come and watch me deal with my sons? Would you like to see me deal with my new wife of one day, who's here in this room?" Now, I'll tell you, It's so ludicrous to deny that we can't love. The other thing I tell them to do is, hey, go around on the college campus. You know, there's a lot of atheists around here, but they don't build themselves that way. Go up after class and ask them. And then see, if you can measure any kind of difference in the way the faculty treat the students, whether they're atheists or non-atheists. Of course, they try it, but they never can find a difference. It's not that atheists are a lot better than the other professors, but they're just as good. Nobody can find that they treat students worse. So I think the problem that you raise is a terribly important problem. And what we have to do in our writing is to show that we love and care for people, that we're not just fighting against these things that are crucial to other people. Let's make it clear in all of our writing how much we care, how much we're capable of loving, and how important love is for the world, just as important as you think it is. Thank you.
Isn't he delightful? Congratulations on your new marriage. We could have had the ceremony here. Geez, we've got the ballroom.